So time now to take you through the Saturday papers, and with me to review them today are the journalist and author Janelle Aldred and the deputy editor of Spiked, Tom Slater. So a very good morning to both of you. Lovely to see you both. Lots of different stories actually on the front pages this morning, aren't there? So let's get through some of them, shall we? Janelle, you've picked out our first one. It's the front page of the Financial Times, and Nadhim Zahawi back on the front page of this newspaper at least.
Yeah, the story describes him as still fighting for his political life, which you wouldn't have to fight for if you just did the right thing. HMRC has admitted that when they were saying last year they weren't investigating any members of the cabinet, they were actually investigating Zahawi when he was Chancellor at the time. I think he's paid some £5 million and an extra £1 million in a penalty. And I think it's really interesting at this point in time. You know, we've kind of moved on from the Partygate and all of this. You know the rules, what you should be doing. And we're back right here again. You know you should pay tax. The HMRC are definitely coming for me at the end of this month. I've had so many reminders, so many messages, even though, you know, you kind of set everything up and do it all the right way. And it seems that, again, we are in a position where members of the cabinet are not doing what they should be doing, which is making sure that everyone has a fair shot at everything, that everyone's doing everything right, and you get rewarded for doing the right thing. And here we have another minister once again caught out, and also HMRC also caught out in not saying the truth about what was happening. So I think he should be fighting for his political life. I think he probably should see if he wants to resign. And but yeah, it's just another example of the government telling us to do something and them doing something else.
Well, yes, and he says that as HMRC concluded from his case, that he'd just been careless and the mistakes were not deliberate. And we have to wait for the outcome of Sir Laurie Magnus's, the independent ethics advisor, don't we, looking into whether or not he's broken the ministerial code before Rishi Sunak will make a decision on his future. Do you want a quick thought on this, Tom, at all?
No, I think it's hard to see how this story ends without Nadhim Zahawi going. You do wonder why Rishi Sunak is taking so long. But I think the other thing is this wouldn't be as big of a deal, as much of a story. It is shocking, it is concerning and so on, if it wasn't for the fact that the government is just kind of running on fumes at this point. So these stories just fill that vacuum even more so than they would otherwise, and just adds to that sense of inevitable scandal and this government being on the way out. So it's just been amplified, I think, by the other problems that the government has. If you see what
And yet yesterday, of course, we had the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, Tom, giving a speech about injecting optimism into the debate about the economy. And he said that Brexit was going to be a gateway to some of the growth. Front page of the Eye, quite interesting in that context. Brexit regrets growing, they say, but the UK not eager to rejoin the EU.
I mean, this is something that we've seen sort of reflected in the polling for some time. I mean, all polling, especially where Brexit concerned, should come with a health warning. We all remember what it was like in the run-up to the referendum, that no one saw that result, at least in the media, in part because of the polling. But again, seeing this kind of point where there is a level of demoralisation with Brexit, but at the same time, there's not this willingness to go back in necessarily. What's interesting when you get under the bonnet, not necessarily of these numbers, which I haven't seen the spreadsheets for, but other kind of polls in this area, is that the number of people who voted for Brexit, the kind of converts, is quite modest, really. There's very few people who would express any buyer's remorse. What's far more significant is that young people who either didn't vote last time around or weren't eligible to vote last time around are overwhelmingly pro-rejoin, and that's really kind of shaping the story. So they've really been influenced by this narrative, false narrative in my view, that everything that's wrong in the country economically is not because of the pandemic and the war in Europe and all of these kind of black swan events, but it's because of the fact that we left the European Union. So I think what that reminds me is that people on my side of this argument, on the Leave side of this argument, really need to win those people over. The Remain campaign never really stopped. If anything, it kind of geared up after the original referendum result came in. I think we haven't seen that on the Brexit side, so much so that a very negative narrative about Brexit, what it represents and what impact it's had, has been able to take hold, particularly amongst young people in the intervening 7 years or whatever it's been.
Janelle, what do you think about that?
I mean, as Tom said, 1 in 10 have some kind of buyer's regret. But I think, I was on the Remain side, and I must say, I do think that Brexit, it's clear it is a big part of the issue. Yes, we had the pandemic, and yes, we've had other things, but we can see the kind of the damage that leaving the European Union has done. Now, would rejoining save all those things? Would they take us back? Would they take us back on a deal like what we had when we left? Probably not. So maybe that's not going to help anything. I want this country to be prosperous. I want us to have a good shot at making Brexit work, but it's not working at the moment. And I think we'd all appreciate that honesty, that this is part of the economic problems that we are facing, not in a silo, but it absolutely is part of it. And I don't forget that we voted for an ideology. We didn't vote for a plan. So we voted for an ideology and then we had the plan. And had we seen the plan first before the ideology, would as many people have voted for it? I'm not sure.
OK, let's move us on to back to the front page of the Financial Times, Tom. And this is focusing on the Ukraine war. And the headline is Putin admits prison recruits.
Yeah, so this is something, it's been an open secret for some time that the Kremlin has been using these Wagner forces, these mercenary groups, essentially, to fight in Ukraine. They've also been at the kind of hard edge of their foreign policy across the world for some time now. So essentially these mercenaries who, in the context of the Ukraine war, have been heavily recruited from convicts, from some of them very kind of violent criminals, drug addicts in some cases as well, who have been thrown into the meat grinder in quite significant numbers. They were very significant in capturing Soledar recently and a lot of the offensives around Bakhmut. And this, in many cases, they've proven to be brutally effective. Fighting for money has been a big kind of particularly strong incentive for some of these people. But I think it's just a reminder of the brutal tactics that the Kremlin is prosecuting in order to try and prosecute this invasion, this imperialistic invasion of Ukraine, and is now admitting to it effectively, which I think speaks to the shamelessness of that organisation, actually giving medals to some of these individuals who are being pushed into this meat grinder. So yes, just another reminder of how brutal the fighting is there and how brutal the tactics are on the Russian side. Well,
yes, and a lot of people expecting spring offensives by both sides in the weeks ahead as well. So Ukraine will continue to dominate our headlines, I'm sure, for some time yet. Janelle, let's turn, shall we, to the front page of the Times next. Is that right, Janelle? Did you want to talk about the Times next? This is Jeremy Hunt giving an interview.
I didn't, but I'll let Tom talk first.
OK, let's Tom. Apologies. I knew I'd made a mistake. Tom, take us to the front page of the Times. And Janelle, if you do want to comment on it, that's absolutely fine. But this is an interview by the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, isn't it, about his priorities when it comes to tax cuts, and they won't be straight away anyway.
Yes, exactly. So it's quite unusual for Jeremy Hunt to give a speech, as he did the other day, or yesterday, ahead of a budget and to do big interviews around it, because they often want to have the element of surprise, pulling rabbits out of a hat and so on. But really what he's trying to do is to manage expectations and manage them downwards, which I think tells you a lot about the position he finds himself in. So pushing back early on any Tory backbenchers who are desperate for tax cuts, stressing that, as far as he's concerned, the main thing we'll do is bring inflation down, and that will be the biggest benefit. But also saying things which, again, probably won't help him in the focus groups about how if we are going to cut taxes, it should be on business rather than individuals. I think the thing he's really struggled to do, because of the fact that he's not allowed him any room to do this, is any kind of sunny optimism. The slogan has felt like things can only get worse for a very long time now. And even though there's hope that things will improve sufficiently so that even within these quite tight fiscal rules he set out for himself, there'll be able to be some kind of pre-election giveaways, that's probably not going to be enough to turn around that general sense of sort of decline and gloom which is set in around this government, which really doesn't have a story to tell other than we're managing things as best we can, which is not, you wouldn't put that on the side of a bus, let's put it that.
Well, yeah, and he was warning against declinism, wasn't he, yesterday? OK, let's move on, shall we, Janelle, to the front page of The Sun, shall we? This has taken your attention, and the headline is S-Club Hannah homeless.
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a shock interview. You know, I'm young enough to remember when S Club 7 were in their prime, but I think it also speaks to the times that we're living in at the moment, which are really, really incredibly tough for people, even people that you wouldn't expect. And you think that people have a lot of money, but things are very expensive. The cost of living is rising. And I think this just goes to show in stark contrast to the way that little people like me and us, we are treated. And definitely, you know, you don't get away with anything. You don't get away with your taxes. You don't get away with, you know, they've rented a property, sold underneath them and leaving people in unstable position. And I think it speaks to where most of the country country are at, in contrast to a lot of the stories that we've just spoken about with government ministers and what they're doing and how the rest of us are living. There is a massively stark contrast. And with talking about the budget coming, the government really need to think about how are they going to help people. It can't just get worse and worse. How are they going to make sure that things get better for everyone so that our country can become more stable, so that everyone can have a fair and equal shot at things?
Yeah, and we haven't got enough time, Tom, to talk about your article about working from home. And seeing as you're both working from home, I think it'd be interesting to perhaps pick it up in a future hour. But we're out of time for the moment. Tom and Janelle, thanks very much indeed. But we'll see you again in the next hour. Maybe we'll delve a bit more inside the papers then. Thanks very much indeed for now. Do stay with us, lots coming up here on Sky News Breakfast, including body cam footage captures the brutal beating of Tyree Nichols by 5 Memphis police officers as he cries out for his mother.